What's up, geeks and gamers? It's Jeremy coming to you with another video, and today we are going to talk about rewriting The Last Jedi. So, I'm going to toss this over to my friend Joe Thordarson. Joe is actually the director of the Memphis Comic and Fantasy Convention. That's where Geeks and Gamers will be present later this year in November. That's going to be at Graceland. I made an announcement video about that the other day. And I'm very, very excited and honored to be there. And Joe is a really great guy. He's also the host of Geek Tank Radio. So I'm going to drop all of his links in the description below. But we're going to toss this video over to Joe. And with his permission, we're actually going to play his rewrite of Episode 8. And I would love to get your thoughts. And if this is something that you enjoy, I would love to have you share it around and things like that. So we want to get as much attention on the Memphis Comic and Fantasy Convention we can. So without further ado, passing it over to Joe right now. You guys have a great day, and we will talk to you later.
Hey everyone, this is Joe Thordarson with Geek Tank Radio on 1019 KISS FM in Memphis. There's been a lot of talk here on our radio show. We never shy away from talking about Star Wars or some of the division that's rose among Star Wars fans, and it sparked a lot of discussion. I hate to see, it's a fandom. I like to see people united, but it's hard to avoid some of the topics that are kind of percolating, especially with Star Wars Episode 8. And one of the things, though, that I found, it was actually kind of a fun exercise for me. There's a lot of discussion about some of the ideas for Star Wars 8 from other writers. Of course, we've even had ideas of what George Lucas had in mind if he were to carry the trilogy on. And I had some fun coming up with I was imagining what would happen if Disney had hired me to write Star Wars Episode 8, just as a fun exercise. And I found that as I got going on it, I really enjoyed it, and I just wanted to share kind of my basic story idea with you about what I would have done if we could go back in time and how I would have written Star Wars Episode 8. And I thought it was a lot of fun, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. So I'm going to give you sort of an outline of what I had in mind, and I'd love to hear your comments. So let's get started. So in my movie, it would not be called The Last Jedi. My movie would have been called Star Wars Episode 8, The Rise of the Queen. And that title is going to become a lot clearer as I explain. So anyway, here's some important features of the story. This film is a passing of the torch from the classic characters to the younger characters, but it is also a final farewell to Leia and Luke. Leia and Luke will not live through this film, therefore it needs to be epic in tone. Leia and Luke need to go out as heroes and in grand fashion. Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill, in my version, would have been the ones to write Luke and Leia's death scenes. If they did not want to write them, they would still have been given script approval. I think it would have been really cool to let Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher have a hand in that process. I think that would have been something great for Star Wars history. I think that would have been very cool. As the film reaches its climax, all hope will seem to be lost. However, Luke and Leia's sacrifices will save the rebellion from ultimate destruction, leaving Rey, Finn, and Poe damaged, but with just enough strength, experience, and cunning to save the galaxy in Episode 9. And of course, speaking of Episode 9, in my version, Luke and Leia would appear as Force ghosts at the end of the trilogy. And sadly, of course, we know that with the passing of Carrie Fisher, her role would have to be done with CGI, but I think that would have been really something to see. And who's to say we're not going to see it? Maybe we will in Episode 9. Here's some character outlines that I came up with. Let's start with Leia. Leia in this film is an aggressive leader. She says, "I'm getting too old to keep drawing this battle out. It's time to crush them." Leia's operating strategy in this film revolves around the fact that her son is a key leader in the First Order. She knows how he thinks. She knows how the Empire and the First Order have operated. She's going to use that knowledge to her advantage, and with the continual hope of bringing her son back to the light. Similar to the way Palpatine orchestrated the destruction of the Jedi and recruited Anakin Skywalker, Leia will attempt to destroy the First Order and turn Ben Solo back to the light. So it's kind of a flip side of what happened with Palpatine and Anakin. Throughout the film, Leia will issue orders that don't seem to make sense. Only near the end do we discover that she and Luke have been working together, laying the groundwork for the victory of the rebellion. And most importantly in my story, Leia will use unique force powers, but she will also freeze a laser blast in midair, just like Kylo Ren did in Episode 7. I think that would be cool. I've also heard where George Lucas had talked about Luke training Leia in the Jedi arts, which to me would just be phenomenal. I think it might be asking a lot for her to pick up a lightsaber, but you can't. One can wish. So let's switch over to Luke now. So Luke, we find out that Luke has cut himself off from everyone because he was convinced he would be more effective working alone. He also feels he is too big of a target, and if he were to live among the rebels, everyone around him would be in even greater danger. I think that's a plausible explanation for why Luke would have cut himself off, in Episode 7. So hopefully, that makes sense. In this film, Luke operates somewhat like a Navy SEAL. Ever since the rise of the First Order, he has been working in secret all over the galaxy, setting up traps against him that will be sprung at the end of the trilogy. He and Leia speak infrequently, but however, he senses that the two of them are working in concert. So it's that connection that he and Leia have, and that guides him to know that he's doing the right thing there. One thing I would love to see as a fan, in my notes here, I have, we will see Luke dominating with a lightsaber and fighting in a style we haven't seen from him before. Not unlike the surprises we saw with Darth Vader at the end of Rogue One. I'm not suggesting Luke becomes brutal like Darth Vader. What I mean by that is just I want to see some things from him we haven't seen. I know that in the past, Mark Hamill has even spoke of Luke doing more one-handed fighting with the lightsaber, giving him, more movement and everything, and it'd be kind of cool to see that. One twist that I had here in my notes, I have Luke's robotic hand is failing him, and it has become a liability. The aging metal and the connecting wires might even be slowly poisoning his blood. I thought that could be an interesting twist. Now let's talk about some of the new characters. Rey. Rey will be trained by Luke, but it will be on-the-job training as she, Luke, Chewbacca, and R2D2 go on missions across the galaxy. In the course of her training, she will be reading ancient Jedi texts. She will discover what she thinks is a prophecy about herself. She doesn't speak of this to anyone, but the idea of this prophecy weighs on her and colors her decisions, tempting her to seek power. So I like this notion of this prophecy, a variation, of course, on the Chosen One prophecy with Anakin. During this film, the scenes of Rey reading and other people reading about Rey will become important. Rey will develop a mastery of the power of force persuasion. I hope that's the right term. Let's see, Finn. In my movie, Finn is a hugely important character, and he has, to me, one of the most interesting arcs. So in my notes here, it says, Finn recovers from his injuries, but he's being pulled apart psychologically as the brainwashing and programming he underwent as a stormtrooper is beginning to reasserting itself. By the use of a 2-minute flashback sequence in the film, we would get a glimpse of what he underwent as a child. It fuels his anger against the First Order. His goal now is to infiltrate the stormtrooper ranks, rescue the children destined for programming, and foment a rebellion within the ranks of the stormtroopers. I think that could be very cool. I'd love to see more division inside the ranks with the stormtroopers. I just think that would be awesome. Let's talk about Poe. In this film, Poe is still jumping in ships and blowing stuff up. There you go. But he will also be working closely with Admiral Akbar, who will not, in parentheses, he will not make it out of this movie alive either, but he will die a hero's death, and at the end, he will utter a stirring phrase before he dies. I don't know what that might be. So I'm going to leave that to the writers, but, something memorable and iconic. The Admiral and Leia will be mentoring Poe during the film, grooming him for a higher leadership role in the rebellion. Leia's death will devastate Poe and further fuel his hatred of the First Order going into Episode 9. Let's talk about Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren is undergoing extreme training by Snoke, Kylo will be completely attentive and obedient to Snoke. However, it becomes evident that he is up to something. Well, I mean, he's a Sith, so obviously. When the time is right, Kylo Ren plans to kill Snoke and take the role of Supreme Leader. That's not a surprise. However, Kylo also wants to take a wife and create a royal bloodline so that the Rens would rule the galaxy as kings and queens hereafter for generations. Kylo, of course, has his heart set on Rey. In the text he discovered during his Jedi training with Luke, it has led him to believe that his union with Rey was foretold in a Jedi prophecy. This is the same prophecy I spoke of with Rey, only Kylo Ren's interpretation is different, and I think that could be interesting. Let's talk about Snoke. With the destruction of Starkiller Base, Snoke is developing a different strategy for controlling the galaxy. His new weapons are much more Big Brother in nature. He is going to use planetary shields on every planet that has a spacefaring civilization, like the shields we saw, in Rogue One. And they will also have much more advanced scanning capabilities. That way, every ship coming in and out of the gate could be scanned or searched, making it next to impossible for anyone to transport contraband items, weapons, or rebels. Snoke will also deploy advanced surveillance satellites around these planets to detect rebel activity on the surface. If any rebel activity on the surface should occur, the gate would be closed and reinforcements would be sent to the planet to crush the uprising. It's a little bit of a different take than what we've seen with Starkiller Base or the Death Star. I think it could be very interesting. Here's a few scenes that I've created that I think would be fun to see in this new version. So on the opening scene, let's talk about that. Rey hands Luke the lightsaber. Luke ignites it and gives it a few spins, like a swordsman testing the weight of the blade. Then he smiles and looks at Rey. "Welcome, Rey." Stunned, she replies, "You know who I am?" "Of course," he says. "I've read all about you." "You've read about me?" Luke doesn't reply, but he gives Rey a knowing smile. "Come along, Rey. We have much to do." As I said, during this film, scenes where Rey is reading or other people are reading about Rey is going to be very important, going back to that prophecy I spoke of. Of course, a little insider spoiler, Luke isn't talking about that at all, but that's a twist that will develop if they ever hand me the reins and let me make the movie. Anyway, this is Star Wars, so of course we're going to have epic space battles. Two of them would involve Luke in his X-Wing fighter. In my version, Luke's X-Wing fighter is not laying at the bottom of the ocean turning to rust. He's been using the X-Wing. In fact, he's even made modifications to it. One of the modifications is cloaking technology, so I hope that fits within Star Wars canon. That's just the idea, that's what I came up with. So his X-Wing now has cloaking technology. There would also be space battles of a more stealth nature as the rebel pilots attempt to thwart the planetary shields. Also, don't be surprised to find scenes where the rebels have turned the tables by trapping the First Order inside of the planetary shields. Near the end of the film, Admiral Akbar will die in heroic battle, sacrificing himself for the rebellion. Before his death, as I said, he would utter a stirring phrase, and this phrase would not only inspire Star Wars fans for generations, but would also probably become an internet meme if they wrote it well enough. But we got to give respect to Admiral Akbar. He's awesome. Here's a scene about Rey and the prophecy. In a quiet scene, Rey would be skimming over an ancient Jedi book. She freezes when she turns to the page, and there on the parchment is a faded drawing of a queen sitting on a throne and radiating golden light. The queen looks remarkably like Rey herself. Below the illustration are these words. And keep in mind, I jotted this down. This is not... I think if we were to actually have a prophecy in this movie, it would be much more eloquent. But this is what I jotted down, so just bear with me. The prophecy read, "She was cast out into the desert, abandoned and forgotten. Yet self-possessed and patient, she waited, for she knew her hour would come. In those days she will take her throne and govern her people with equity. The people will rejoice at her arrival. Peace will come to all who know her, and all will become one in the Force." Rey pores over these texts for the rest of the night. However, she doesn't tell Luke about this right away. But for the rest of the film, the prophecy of the Queen weighs heavily on Rey's mind. I have a scene here that I think could be really fun, and it involves BB8 and R2D2. Tell me what you think of this. In a sequence that would consist of no more than 2 to 3 minutes of screen time, the two droids would go off on a clandestine mission by themselves. Through the use of beeps and gestures, the scene would play out, leaving us, the audience, to interpret the words passing between them for ourselves. In parentheses, I have, this would provide Star Wars fans years of online entertainment as they debated over the meaning of the dialogue in this iconic scene. During the sequence, R2-D2 would be injured, saving BB-8 from destruction, and leaving R2-D2 with a scar across his dome, not unlike Kylo Ren's and Anakin's scar. Later in the film, instead of getting his dome repaired, he chooses to keep the scar, partly as a reminder of the cost of the battle, but I think mostly because R2-D2 thinks it looks cool. So I'm picturing R2-D2 with a battle wound. I think that would be pretty cool. I have a scene with Luke and Rey. Luke and Rey would be on a planet controlled by the First Order. They would battle their way through dozens of droids and stormtroopers. Just before they reach their escape ship, however, they are surrounded by 500 stormtroopers. Instead of battling their way out of this situation, Rey uses force persuasion against all of them. The troopers lower their weapons and part ranks, allowing Luke and Rey to board their ship and leave in peace. I don't know if this fits within Star Wars canon. I don't know if this is something a Jedi could do, but I think it would be pretty awesome to see that kind of mental power. So that's a scene I'm sure I'm going to hear some feedback about. Here's a scene with Leia and Finn. In a quiet scene, Leia is telling Finn the story of the first days of the Empire and the infamous Order 66. She said, "My adopted father was there the day the Jedi Temple was raided. They spared no one, not even the children." "I don't know what's worse," replied Finn. "The First Order recruits children and turns them into killers. Either way, whenever dictators come to power, the young always seem to be the first victims." By the end of this scene, Finn is even more resolved to go back. He will infiltrate the First Order, foment an insurrection among the stormtroopers, and free the children destined for programming. Also, an outgrowth of this scene would be that Rey is going to rescue a young stormtrooper. I'm thinking maybe between 10 to 12 years of age, will have some training and will be turned and join the rebellion. And I think it would be very cool. It's kind of a younger version of Finn. I think a young person with some cool abilities coming out of the stormtrooper ranks would be a really cool addition to the rebellion. So I haven't completely fleshed out what that person would be. But anyway, here's a scene with Kylo Ren. Somehow Anakin Skywalker will manifest himself to Kylo Ren. However, the communication will be so clouded and vague that Kylo is able to convince himself that Darth Vader was actually leading him to the dark side rather than to the light. I just want to, I don't know exactly what that would look like. I just want to see something beyond, all we've seen so far is that melted mask, but I'd like to see some sort of communication between Kylo Ren and Anakin Skywalker. I think that could be very interesting. Here's a scene with Snoke. We would see Snoke in a conference room with other leaders of the First Order discussing their ultimate goals. "The planet shields have been deployed, and now it's time to hunt down the last of the resistance," he says. "We need to dispatch them quickly, lest they inspire the people to dream that the rebellion has a future." I just wanted to see Snoke with somebody besides his the guards in the red suits and Kylo Ren. I think it would be, I'd like to see him around some other leaders of the First Order. That's mostly what that's about. And here's one more scene. Later in the film, this is Luke and Rey. This has to do with the prophecy. So later in the film, Luke explains the meaning of the Queen on the throne to Rey. "It is both a prophecy and a Jedi maxim," he says. "The throne refers to our heart. The she who sits upon the throne is a representation of the most powerful force in the universe, which of course is love. Only when love is fixed in our hearts will we become one in the Force." But this reading is also believed to be a prophecy, foretelling the rise of a great queen. who will rule the galaxy in peace. However, her identity and the time of her arrival is cloaked in mystery. Perhaps she will arrive tomorrow, perhaps 1,000 years from now. It's best not to dwell on such things, my Padawan. Keep your focus on your training and on the present moment, here and now. I'm not going to read you all the rest of my notes. This has already been a pretty long video, but I had a lot of fun doing this. It doesn't really matter. Disney's not going to hire me to write Star Wars, and we've already had episode 8, but I like the elements of this story, and I would just be curious what your feedback is. So I'd love to hear from you. So check us out at geektankradio.com. You listen to our podcast at 101.9 KISS FM, keyword Geek Tank, or you can email us. Email us at geektankradio@gmail.com, and of course click on the comments below. But that was my Star Wars episode 8 rewrite, and this is Joe Thorderson again signing off, and I look forward to hearing from you.